Welcome to the Property Experts Podcast, where you'll find open conversations, no bullshit attitudes, and deep dive insights from award-winning property developers and business owners, Ben Richards and Jack Jiggins. Together, they've delivered over 40 million in gross development value over the last 5 years and have a pipeline of over 25 million to deliver in the next 18 months. They've built numerous other 7-figure businesses with 6-figure net profits around their property ecosystem, and it's by no means been an easy ride. So on this podcast, they'll share their weekly trials and tribulations running multiple businesses, giving you never before seen insights into the inner workings of finding, funding, designing, delivering, and selling award-winning property deals, together with golden nuggets of advice through the 5 key areas of any business: marketing, sales, operations, finance, and talent. If you're a young entrepreneur looking to get started, or have a small team but you're looking to scale your business to the next level, this is the No Bullshit podcast for you.
Hello everyone and welcome back from skiing live at 5. Ben's not doing it on his own, and thank you very much for joining. As always, Ben and I will be running through the highs and lows of running multiple businesses, and we'll be sharing some exciting news today. So make sure you stay with us, and without further ado, we will go into the agenda for today. So today we're going to be touching on, specifically, we had a fund meeting and we'll be sharing how that went. We'll be sharing what questions you should be asking a bank or even a development lender. I know that quite frequently you just go to a broker, but we do a lot of work direct with lenders. So we'll be sharing some top tips and questions to be sharing to those. Reducing build costs. I think Ben's going to do a bit of a stint on this because the only way I know how to reduce build costs is to pick up the tools and deliver it yourself. XPS, setting goals and looking at other people in the market. So if you're running a business and you want to scale it, who should you be following and what should you be looking at for other businesses? Long Hanborough, which is a deal that we've been mentioning for a few weeks now. We exchanged on that 2 weeks ago, and today was the completion deadline. So if anyone's ever had 2 weeks between exchange completion, you can see how we're probably pretty stressed today. Corporate guarantee or debenture and what types of security lenders want to see. So we'll touch on that on point 2 and then also on point 6. Recruiting for an administration assistant and a BDM in XP surveys. What is important for covenant strength and what to look for? We have an opportunity. We've got quite a dry investment. If anyone would like to hear about that, stay tuned. And then last but not least, your questions answered. So just to remind you, you can ask questions throughout the whole episode and we will come round to them. It can be any question, whether it's business or not business related. And we've got quite an exciting one to touch on with regards to option agreements.
Yeah, I've got to say welcome everyone. And also, I do actually think this episode is probably the most value-giving episode we've ever done. Like putting these slides together and looking at the agenda items, I think this is going to be a banger. So yeah, get your questions ready. I think there'll be so much stuff that you should be getting your notepad out for and jotting down, or at least saving this video so that you can watch it over and again. A bit of housekeeping as well, because I know that over the last couple of weeks, people have been requesting our templates and using that link below. So it's bit.ly/XP_templates. If you don't capitalize the XP and don't capitalize the T on templates, it doesn't work for some strange reason. So it has to be exactly as it's written on the screen there. So yeah, bit of housekeeping. On to fund meeting.
Good. So I wanted to put this in here because, as you know, the episode that's actually been shared in front of you, which was 5 months ago, which started our road to 10 million. And just for the listeners out there, we've actually raised in excess of 14, well, probably now closing that deal, or maybe not closing that deal today, like 15 million. Spoiler alert. But what I wanted to touch on is back when we were growing the companies and we were networking a lot, you have to be very open-minded. And to some degree, when you haven't got any expertise or got any contacts or you're sort of starting out in your journey, you do tend to take up on a lot more meetings. Now we're at the point where we have to be quite selective of our time because we've got a lot going on and that's quite demanding for us. Anyhow, I had a meeting on Tuesday, which I was going along to potentially subsell a project on. If anyone wants to buy a nice 9-unit development in the west of London, hit us up. And I attended this meeting, not really expecting any much more other than meeting another developer, building a bit of rapport for them and seeing if they would like to buy this site off us. Coincidentally, they brought their backer along, who fundamentally funds very similar to us, deal by deal scenario to that developer. This developer's a lot more senior, probably slowing down, just doing a scheme a year to keep the mind going and definitely not scaling at the same rate as we are. But their funder is of a different ilk and definitely wants to scale up and grow a fund to the tune of about £200 million. So it just goes to show you can't always discount meetings, not knowing what the outcome of them might be or not knowing what they might be able to introduce you to. So a point for me really that, it was one of those meetings that coincidentally I almost postponed it because my flight back from skiing was looking pretty dicey with the storm causing issues. I heard that there was 15,000 people streaming landings at Heathrow, and guess what? We were landing at Heathrow. So anyway, I almost cancelled it and postponed it and went along because my flight was on time and landed just about on the runway. And it just goes to show, you can meet anyone in any capacity. It doesn't have to be property. This guy is actually from the events business. I'm talking big style events in Saudi, in, Eastern European areas, in the Middle East, and also in London. So just go show, be open-minded, always say what you're doing, because I always heard a rule when we started networking is tell everyone what you do. But I think what is more important is tell them what you need. And off the back of that meeting and a really good conversation, we booked in a second meeting to hopefully get the balls rolling on being part of that growth strategy that they're setting up, which is 200 million into real estate investment and development. And also really interesting, he's building up an exit strategy as well. So it's equity, debt, and then exit, which is basically a developer's dream, I think.
Very good. Cool. Point number 2, actually, before we go into this, I wanted to almost put a bit of a poll out there, and I didn't speak to you about this, Jack, but it's been raised a couple of times that Friday at 5 p.m. potentially isn't the best timing for people. If you would rather see us do this live and you can tune in at a better time, and we were thinking either Friday at lunchtime instead of 5 p.m. or Wednesday at lunchtime, so maybe 12 till 1 on a Wednesday, 12 till 1 on a Friday, either one of those. Let us know in the comments below what you think would be best, because we want as many people to watch live as possible, because there's live questions that will come in and it's a bit more interactive. So yeah, let us know down below if there's a better time that you think we should be doing these.
Good. So on to banks, from equity to debt. So I had a call with a bank called UTB on Tuesday as well, actually. Very big finance day for me on Tuesday. And long story short, Ben and I nearly funded a deal in a place called Warburg, where we bought a bungalow, went to planning for 2 units, ended up selling it at an auction, and UTB were due to fund that deal. This was 6 years ago, I think, and I keep getting their monthly emails, and I keep thinking to myself, they were cheaper than everyone else. I can guarantee if you did a deal with them, built a relationship and got a seamless process built up that you could work with them, they would be a good lender to work with. And eventually it took till last week for me to go, right, I'm just going to speak to them, tell them where we're at now. We've got a bit of a reputation, for good or bad, and see what they're doing in terms of rates. Coincidentally jumps on the call, and he went to the same school as me, big rugby boy. We got on really well. I'm sure we'll do a lot of business. But the reason I wanted to share this with our listeners is because our QS was actually in the office that day, and he overheard a lot of the questions I asked, which he didn't think would be normal questions. So I've got on here short-term and long-term questions that I would ask. So the short-term are the obvious things. So what rates are they charging? You need to remember that's arrangement, that's including broker fees, that's admin fees, that's valuations, that's PMS, that's monitoring surveyor, all of those rates. Loan sizes, I always ask that question because the last thing you want to be doing is working with a lender where you're sort of almost always below or even always above. So for an example, UTB, their minimum loan size is £1 million. A deal that we've been working on to get over the line today, their maximum loan is £2 million. So it's good to understand who fits in what box. And that other lender is called Roma Capital. And then equally to loan sizes, does that fit in with your textbook size of project that you want to be building and growing? Because you might quickly outgrow a specific bank, which means your relationship might become redundant. So for an example, you can't build a HMO portfolio with the UTB. What is the point of meeting with them? But you could with Roma Capital. But if you're a growing development company, you might quickly outgrow Roma Capital. So just think about that and where you're investing your time. Loan to value is obviously a question that we want to know so that you can analyze what sort of equity pieces you need to put in. A good example of that is your high street banks such as Barclays, NatWest, Handelsbank. They do development finance and investment finance, but they're going to be low 55, 60% loan to value, which for a lot of us aggressive developers, that's not good enough. So we like to get all the way up to sort of 80% on cost. So asking them what their loan to values are. One really, really good question I have when I always ask this is people go, what loan to value do you lend on? That is not the be all and end all, and you will come at Cropper and find issues with them if you only ask that question. There's 3 really important metrics that you need to ask them. That's loan to value, so that's existing value of the property, and or existing value at the end of the property when you're refinancing. The loan to cost, so that's the total costs and what they'll lend up to, and the loan to gross development value. Once you know those 3 metrics, every lender out there that I know, if you have those 3 metrics, it will be a minimum of one of them. So what I mean by that is you might borrow 100% loan to cost, but still be down at 50% loan to GDV. They will always take the lower amount of whatever they can lend on that capacity. So that example, exactly, if you bought a plot of land, it's got a really high GDV, but you could actually borrow well high into the loan to cost because the loan to GDV is still 50%. They will still cap it on that threshold. So you can't have all of it. You can only go up to one of their thresholds. The rest in the other capacity is sort of dead and gone, and you've got a cash flow yourself. So that's a really good tip there. Short-term consideration, process and underwriting process. I'm still to this day believe the most difficult person to convince to do a deal is the underwriter. They are not built like us. They're not optimists. They are trying to find problems with stuff. So I always like to ask the question, who's underwriting? Are they pragmatic? What is your process? Does it go to credit before you get terms? Does it not go to credit before you get terms? Does it go to credit before you get a valuation? We recently came a cropper with Yorkshire Building Society, and it's actually in an episode probably about 2-3 months ago now. They got a valuation instructed, legals instructed, EPC assessment instructed, before they went to credit. And guess what? They didn't want to back the deal. That was all it cost us. And we're now in a debate whether we get that back or not. But that's an example of making sure that you get credit back terms as soon as you can before you're to invest, and what that process looks like. Security on this deal that we're getting over the line today is exactly that. We push back on a piece of security, which we'll talk a bit about later, which is corporate guarantee or a debenture. And fundamentally, if you're a portfolio building entity, so more like an HMO or buy-to-let portfolio, you're going to struggle if you're giving debentures out because you've got to get certain things in place to get consent from the existing debenture holder. So that's really important to our security. So it's normally obviously first charge, personal guarantees, potentially a debenture, potentially a charge over shares, which is basically the same thing as a debenture. Not exactly, but pretty much the same thing, or even a corporate guarantee on top of the personal guarantees. So ask what their security profile is. Typical projects. So this is one that is a really, really important question, because I know lenders out there that will not build out PD. I know lenders out there that will not do conversions. And I know lenders out there that only do new build. So you want to make sure that if you're looking at, the way we look at a site is we look at something and we analyze how to add value. It could literally be anything. It could be a police station, a doctor's surgery, a plot of land, a conversion. So we want someone that's fairly multidisciplinary in how they look at projects. And for that reason, I always ask that question, which is typical projects. What do they look for? Will they do a bit of everything? So they're your short-term ones. That's to get one deal done and be happy and shake hands and moan about how expensive they are and they've made more money than you because they charge so much. Now on to the longest term stuff, which is what I'm really interested in. I kind of don't want to do a deal with a lender that I don't have a potential long-term relationship with. Ben and I had a great success with a lender for a few years where we had a really good relationship, very well oiled. Their rates were good, their process was good, and it was very seamless. Now we're back in the market for this type of thing, which is why I'm speaking to UTB. So these are the types of questions I ask for the longer term perspective. First question is, what is their competitive advantage? It's a good question because it makes them think, what are we good at compared to everyone else? And if that sort of fits in with your model, then, great. So for an example, in Central Suites, we do a lot of flips. I don't want that process of borrowing money to be arduous or painful because it's a quick fire. It's, we're not rate driven, we're speed driven. So if they say their competitive advantage is speed, great, I'm signed up. But that probably wouldn't work for the development perspective, because rather than borrowing 200 grand, we're borrowing £2 million, and that costs. And that costs inflation is relative for the speed that you're getting. Next one is, can you see yourself building a relationship with them? So what I ask is, if we come back to you after this deal, or if we do more deals from you, do you have preferential rates, or what could you offer a returning borrower? That's a really good question, because if they're just a computer says yes, stamp book process, no preference to anyone else, are they really the lender you want to be with? We're in a people business, and I believe that you want to be building a relationship, especially when times get tough, with someone that you can call up and say, look, we've done this. Can we get an extension, or can we borrow a bit more, or we've got another deal. Can we get better rates? So relationship building. This was the question that our QS raised his eyebrows at. Where does their funding come from? So the reason I want to know that is because, is it going to be there forever? Are they buying swap rates, SONIA rates? Are they a deposit bank, which is where their peers are depositing money and they're then putting a markup on that money to invest it back into real estate? And that's a really good question, because if they've got one funding line, and then I normally ask, when's that facility coming to an end? And they say, 2025. You might be in a completely different market in 2026, and it might be for the better or the worse, but it's good for you to know that. Equally, you kind of know where their books transfer to. So always asking, what are their funding lines? Have they got multiple? We work with lenders that have got private funding lines. We work with lenders that have got institutional funding lines. We work with deposit banks. UTB is the deposit bank. So asking where their funds come from. And I think that a lot of brokers actually said to me, when COVID was getting a bit rocky and people were worried about lenders and whether they're going to pull stuff, a lot of people actually said, look at the lender, look where their facility comes from. And I think you'll be okay with that lender for that reason, or not okay for that reason. So that's definitely a risk profile for the longer lenders. I always look for a lender, rather than finding problems, likes creating solutions. And the first lender that comes to mind that actually does this really well is Think Property Finance. Normally, if they're asking questions, it's because they don't know the answer, or they're interested in knowing more, or they're looking to try and find a solution to overcome that problem. We've worked with more lenders, more than less, that find a problem and just wait for you to deal with it. May not act pragmatically and just say, basically, computer says no. I had this on one of my HMOs where the lender wasn't happy that I converted bedroom into an ensuite bedroom, even though you don't need planning for it because there wasn't any windows, etc. And it was just computer said no, and it wasted 6 months, and it's painful. So creating solutions rather than finding problems, and it's an easy question to ask yourself once you've been through the process with a lender. Last two, I won't rattle on too long on this, is have they refinanced out another lender before, and why? I like asking this question because it enables you to understand a problem they have resolved before and they've been unique in that aspect. So for me, that is sort of replicating the above, finding a solution or creating a solution that another lender couldn't find. Obviously, that is not reference to refinancing out for duration reasons. Or have they been refinanced out with another lender, and why? And if they turn around and say, the builder was slow, or we couldn't get comfortable with, the quality that was being built, or there was an issue with the neighbour, they're probably not that a pragmatic bank. And you kind of want someone that's going to be with you for the long haul and see the scheme out with you and, work with you, because it does cost a lot to go in and out with lending. And we've learned firsthand with a couple of lenders that, if they get the excuse, they will just whack a load of bills on it and it's painful. But will they get future business? No, is the answer.
Very good. Some bangers there. Told you should be noting all these down. Some really good points there. I'm going to be talking about reducing build costs now and value engineering, because we've had 2 recent tenders come back way over budget. If you tuned into last week's episode, you'll understand a bit about those 2 projects. But it got me thinking, because I've been doing a lot of work this last week on reviewing and analysing tender returns, really digging in deep on architectural drawings, on the structural design, on really the whole strategy around some of these schemes, with the view to looking at ways in which we can save cost to the minor detail. Whether it's £400 here or there, those £400 soon add up. And these top tips will hopefully help you think about it in the way that I've been going about it over the last couple of weeks, in which, we've started to save a significant amount of money on the contract value by doing these things. So get your notepad ready. First thing would be to call a meeting with your architect and your QS. So a design team meeting to just get ideas from various different people around ways in which you can save costs. These first ones are very much sort of high level stuff. Secondly, something that is often overlooked is actually getting feedback from the contractors that have quoted. So if certain contractors have come in and seem pragmatic about their approach, they will be willing to have a video call with you for half an hour, for example, where they get their QS on the call with you. They've obviously gone through it themselves in a great bit of detail. And I've no doubt, given their experience, they will have thought as they're working through the schedule of works, why are they doing it this way? Why don't they think about doing X or Y? Because that will save them money. Some of the contractors do their own developing. So actually, they've got a really good insight into how they can value engineer the schemes. So, having that open conversation with contractors. And it actually, I think, and this has been the case really with the 2 tenders that we're out to at the moment, it's actually made me discount some contractors from our process because they've not been willing to open this conversation. And I understand from their perspective, if they're spending a lot of time going away and looking at these things, then that's time on their side. But ultimately, if they want to win the work, they're going to have to do that. And I have been put off by some contractors whose basically their response is, unless you're willing to sign a letter that says, we will be moving forward with you guys, they're not willing to do a just sort of second round of investigation. And, that's absolutely fine. That might not work for us, but maybe they've got loads of other tenders that they're not interested in. But yeah, requesting feedback from contractors is a great way of kind of getting a contractor's view on what can potentially be done to save costs. Something that we haven't really touched on massively, but most of our schemes, we will try and get a contractor in to strip out the site as fast as possible. Don't package up your demolition and your strip out works as part of your main contract, because you're just going to be wasting time. And what's going to happen is the main contractor is going to get on site. They're going to start stripping out loads of stuff, find loads of issues that then they start ramping up their costs with. And you've kind of wasted loads of time and it's going to cost you loads more. So as soon as you get keys, I would definitely recommend getting someone in to start doing the strip out works, to strip things back to the structure, open up the ceiling, all the things that you need to do to kind of get a good sense of where there are repairs that are going to be needed. We weren't really sure, what was behind this wall. Is it going to help us? And can we keep some of that, existing structure in place? Or is there insulation in this area that we can retain and not have to put new insulation in and all that sort of stuff? So stripping out before the main contract works are agreed with a main contractor is a massive way of both saving cost and speeding up your program. Once it's stripped out, get your structural engineer on site to then re-review his design, because I guarantee when he's done his initial appraisal, he's made assumption here, assumption there. He can't see what the existing size of joists are, or what the existing load bearing support for this floor is, or which way the floor joists run in certain situations. So all of those things help an engineer to figure out exactly what the situation is on site, so they can design a more efficient and lean solution. And that more efficient and lean solution is only going to be a cost saving to you, because they can reduce the size of joists, they can reduce the size of steel beams. They may not even need a steel beam in certain situations. And to wait until you're actually doing the main contract to find out those issues is just going to cost you loads of money. A big one nowadays is reviewing the energy strategy, and this goes really, really back to basics. We actually had a call yesterday with our energy consultant to look at ways in which we can mitigate, reduce insulation levels to the bare minimum of what's required from a building regulations perspective. Can we change our heating systems? We actually had a mixed solution on Colney Hatch Lane, for example, where we had some air source heat pumps, some electric heating, some gas heating. What we've really realized is that the gas connections and the cost associated with those are actually still a lot less than moving to the installation of air source heat pumps, the installation of electric heating, and the extra additional insulation requirements that you need to install to get a EPC rating of C+. Electric heating really just doesn't perform very well at the moment. So you can easily go from an EPC E to an EPC high C/B just by moving back to a gas combi boiler, for example. So that's what we're going to be doing in this situation. So really going back to the energy strategy and figuring out how the whole system and the whole building fabric is going to work together. On that note, reviewing every bit of wall and floor and roof build-up about insulation, or how much can we actually reduce it down from 100 mil of insulation down to 70 mil of insulation. And that might not seem massive, but when you add up the amount of insulation that you're putting into a house, that 30% saving in size is probably a 15% saving on cost, for example. So you're instantly reducing your insulation cost by 15%. The other big thing which has come out of conversations with contractors recently, and the EPC energy assessor actually, is the type and specification of insulation. So if your architect is specifying Kingspan insulation, for example, throughout your project, Kingspan is like the best performing insulation out there. It's the most expensive. So if you're specifying Kingspan, you're probably already costing yourself 10-15% more than if you went to something like Celotex or Extratherm or something that's more off the shelf that builder's going to go to Travis Perkins and say, well, what's the cheapest insulation you give me? There it is. The caveat with that is you will need to refer that back to your energy assessor, because the reason that Kingspan is often more expensive is because the performance of it is better. So the resistance value of the insulation is slightly better than your off-the-shelf Celotex insulation. So you just need to make sure that your U values are kind of where they need to be with your energy consultant. Big ticket items. So the big standout items are where you're going to save a shitload of money. So, for example, Colney Hatch Lane at the moment, our windows and doors on that whole site are costing us about £180,000. Now, if we can just shave 10% off that, that's a huge saving to the whole project. So looking at big ticket items like the windows and doors, the MEP is another one, moving from that air source heat pump, which might cost you £5,000 to supply and install, to a gas central combi boiler, where it's, maybe £2,000 for the gas combi boiler. That's a massive difference in those big ticket items. Look at your material types. So can you actually use a different product? I was having a conversation with a developer today who's specified VM zinc cladding all over his dormer and roof. And I know through installing some metal cladding at our office development at Hyde End Road in Spencerswood, Reading, that you can find a comparative aluminium product that's about 30% less than the zinc from VM zinc. Now, they look different, yes. The quality is different, yes. But from a cost perspective, that's a big saving as well. We're changing a solid blockwork wall, 9-inch blockwork wall, to a double skin studwork as our party walls in Colney Hatch Lane. And we're saving about 40% on that build up. Now, I actually, in my head and historically, when I've looked at these sorts of things, I've always thought putting up a blockwork wall, scratch render, plasterboard on both sides would be cheaper than studwork. But I think in recent years, blockwork, blocks, bricks, all of that hard material has increased far more than metal track studwork, for example, and the costs have actually flipped on its head. So it's often cheaper to install studwork than it is a blockwork wall now. Looking at your internal finishes, where can you trim £40 per square metre flooring down to £30 per square metre flooring? No, it doesn't seem a huge amount. It's £10 per square metre, but actually in reality that's a 25% saving. And if you've got a 20 unit scheme over the course of that whole development, that's a massive saving. So looking at your internal finishes with your architect, with your interior designer, really trying to trim down on those costs. This point number 10 actually came from a contractor recommendation. Again, going back to point number 2, we jumped on a call with one of the contractors and they actually suggested some really good cost savings for the external hard surfacings. And that was essentially, we've got a 1.5 metre wide pathway along the side of the property. Why don't we just take 600 mil out of that completely, create a planting bed rather than a hard surface block paving finish, which is very expensive, and just put some topsoil in there and some planting, which is far cheaper. So again, it not only improves the kind of green aesthetics of the development, but it also saves you, what's that, 600, well, it's like over a third of the cost of laying that hard surfacing. So another sort of massive saving point for you there. So final point on this is when you are providing supply items, so often we might supply the kitchen or we might supply the finishes, the contractor will probably want to put some OHP, some overheads and profit on the supply items for managing that process. Now, they might start at 20% for that, and that's just ridiculous. So, asking the question or saying, we need you to lower your price from 20% on your OHP down to 10% if we're, managing the supply of those items and just giving them to you to install, is something that you can ask them. So hopefully those 11 points have been really useful. We've gone through this on Colney Hatch Lane. I'm only probably halfway through my analysis, and I've already found £200,000 worth of savings on a £2 million contract. So that 200 grand is massive. And just as an example down here, just to see how I've pieced together or how I've gone about it, basically going line item
through the rates of the contractor, looking at what's been specified. So there's some walls that we had as double skin facing reclaimed London stock brickwork. £450 per square metre rate is massive because reclaimed London stock brickwork is really expensive. By changing that to a blockwork rendered white wall, we're saving £800. And this is just one wall as part of the scheme. So we're looking at the front elevation that you can see here, this whole ground floor, sort of lower ground floor basement level. There's no real need for that to be yellow stock brick. So if we made this whole floor rendered blockwork instead, the saving is £6,000, not £800, and £6,000 is a massive saving. So hopefully that's been some useful food for thought in terms of your schemes, the types of things you should be looking at, how you should approach it. And hopefully that saves some build costs on your own schemes.
Ben, you got a question. Will these changes impact the GDV?
Yeah, good question. They can do, but I'll ask you the question. If you have a white rendered blockwork facing wall at lower ground level, do you think that's going to impact the GDV? Would a potential buyer notice that? I don't think they would. That's £6,000 saving straight away. You have got to be careful. And it is actually a very good point specifically for this project, because we're in an area where resale values are £800 a square foot. We have to sell well, and we have to create a product that is right for the sales market in that area. So when I say moving from £40 a square metre to £30 a square metre on flooring, it's going to depend on what that flooring is. If you're going from an engineered wood flooring down to an LVT or a laminate, the quality of that and the perceived quality of that probably isn't worth doing and saving that £10 per square metre. But the areas that I'm looking at in terms of insulation levels within the wall, insulation levels within the roof, if you can still achieve a B rating off the back of that, the potential buyer isn't actually going to have any idea as to whether or not you've done that. It's just purely a cost saving. So it is a very good question. It is something you have to weigh up when looking at these. Sometimes it will be a no, but most of the time, the end buyer isn't going to know the difference.
Yeah, I think it's just got to be part of the decision process, hasn't it?
Yeah. I think we just wanted to put a note in there. We've actually had a lot of people reach out recently over the past couple of weeks. One for sort of one-to-one consultancy, just to get an hour of our time, just to help with the growth of their business and to pick our brains on certain things. But we also have a few spaces left within our boardroom group, which if you're looking to grow your business to 7 figures, 8 figures, we'd love to help you do that. The people we've got in the room now are fantastic and they're doing amazing things. So, if you are interested in joining the group of what will be 10 to 12 people on a monthly basis, reviewing goals, looking ahead and projecting their businesses to success, do comment boardroom below or get in touch with us directly.
If you're excited by some of the property developments or investments that we talk about on this show and want to know more about investing £100,000 or more with XP, email info@xpproperty.co.uk to set up a call with one of our team. We can discuss our open investment opportunities and provide you with our track record details showing with complete transparency our historic performance project by project and how you could be part of our growing pipeline of developments.
Good rabbit holes we're going to talk about now. Yeah, so I got in a bit of a rabbit hole, and the whole purpose of what I was creating is we have a business coach in XP Surveys, and month by month we meet up and we talk about our gross profit, our operations to get to where our gross profit needs to be. We talk about our central costs that bring our net profit out. We talk about how efficient we are, what our cost per acquisition is. Easiest way to figure out what you need to be doing is just to look at someone bigger that's doing it right and doing it better. When I say better, as in not the service or product, because I believe that we have a unique selling point in our surveying business, but more so that, they've done it before and worn the t-shirt. So this is a tip out there. If anyone's got specifically a service-based business, this is quite effective. So, staff to turnover ratio are important metrics. And you're trying to gauge, is what you're doing today going to get to where you want to be in the future? And I went down this rabbit hole and sent some metrics to Ben because I found it quite interesting. So we're obviously a surveying business. We're averaging this calendar year about £500,000 in turnover. We want to grow to be a national multi-million pound surveying business in the UK. And we've got good foundations to do that. But it's obviously a long journey to get to the processes and the scalability and the client acquisition and the growth and the operations and the finance all married up in one. And the rabbit hole I went down was if you turn over more than £10 million in the UK, you're an audited business, which means you need to share your audited figures on Companies House. All of us that are under £10 million turnover per year, we have to produce company accounts on Companies House. But the difference being is audited accounts have a lot more detail on them. They show gross profit margins, net profit margins, they show all of the overhead details, and you can actually extrapolate a lot more information from that. So what we're getting at is if you want to eventually be turning over 10 plus million as a business, find someone else that's in your industry doing what you do, but is already at that level, and just look at their accounts, because we believe, and we've always been avid, believers, that the numbers take care of themselves. The numbers are the engine underneath the car bonnet. What it looks like externally is another matter. If the numbers don't work, the business doesn't work. And that's what really keeps the soul and the heart of the business going. So to give you an example, we're a team of, I believe, 5 or 6 now in XP surveys. And I was actually comparing this particular company example, which is called Plowman Craven. They turn over about 18 to 19 million pounds per year, way more than we do, 40 times what we do. But I want to know, are they 40 times the size of us? Have they got 40 times the size of amount of surveyors? Have they got 40 times the amount of business development managers? Have they got 40 times the amount of people in central offices? And looking at those ratios at where they're growing to see where we could cut the fat in our business, because they're basically an exaggerated version of us. And the trouble you have in our business is one hire is a really big impact on an overhead. But when you're a big business, you can actually work out percentages such as, for an example, this business makes £109,000 revenue per person in the business. So out of that £19 million turnover and the 180 staff, £109,000 revenue is where we need to be targeting as a business in excess of to make our business work. Otherwise, we're not on the scalable model to get there. We've got the cost of sales per person. So not every one of those persons is generating revenue. Some of them are admin, central offices, make the operations behind closed doors. But most of that should be cost of sales per person. So working out what the cost is, the cost of sales will show in the gross profit figures on the audited accounts. So you can work out that figure. And then we've got gross profit per person as a revenue market. And then we've got net profit per person. So what we actually worked out, the gross profit per person was at £39,000 per head, and the net profit per person was £15,000 per head. So if we can get our business to a point where we're making 15,000 net profit per person, you can sort of see we're on the right trajectory to get to where we need to go. And you could do this with multiple businesses, learn from what they've got on their websites, their products, what they've brought in as upsells and different product, and essentially look at where you can grow. I read a book once about the founder of IBM, and he drew a vision in a book, and he kept the book because he always reflected back to that vision of where he wanted to be. And eventually, when he was running the business successfully for 40 years, and I think was the largest company in the world at one point, it looked exactly the way he envisaged it at the beginning. So having the end in mind. So planning the route before you get there. And I think that this was quite a useful exercise just to sort of second gauge where we're at as a very similar business and what we're doing to what someone else has done and had obviously had success. And it's quite an impressive company, actually. A very profitable company. I think they're on something like 15% net profit margin, which is pretty good when you're turning over 19 million. And it would be good to get there one day when we do. But just an insight to anyone running a service-based business, have a little Google around, look for a big firm, look at their accounts and indulge in what they're getting up to. Because you can look at all that. And, if you couldn't find that, I would pay for it. So you don't have to pay for it. It's just on Companies House. So it's a worthy exercise.
Yeah, nice. Really good. I'm conscious we're 40 minutes into this and we're on point 4. So should we leave this deep dive into next week? Because there's loads of other good stuff that...
Yeah, let's just do the drum roll and then we'll do the deep dive next week.
Okay.
I'll put my swimming trunks on for next week. So we exchanged on this 2 weeks ago and we had until today to complete on the property. Actually, I will do a tip for everyone out there on completion dates. I was speaking to a mentee this week and he wasn't aware the standard rule for a completion date is you normally have 10 working days to complete after the fact of a completion date. Little fun fact for you there. If you didn't know it, check the contract and see if you've got that time thereafter, and don't stress if you're pulling out your hair on completion date, because we always do. But anyway, we had 2 weeks to complete on this amazing doctor's surgery. which is located a spitting distance from Woodstock, which is where Blenheim Palace, one of the top 5 UK destinations for travel, is to go to, and my wife's favourite place to go, even though she still can't pronounce Blenheim. And we were due to complete on this today, and the amazing news is we managed to get it over the line. So well done to the team. Huge congratulations to our investor that joined us on this project. And if you are an investor out there and want to work with us on any projects, please do reach out. This is actually a new investor that we've known for a very long time. So we're excited to prove what we can do with them. And this will be converted into 4 apartments under Class MA planning approval, because it's a doctor's surgery that now falls into category E for use class. And then we're going to reconvert that to a basically 4 cluster flats, really, to generate 13 bedrooms. And a little spoiler before the deep dive. Why do you think XP are buying something that's potentially below 2 million GDV? Because that is our threshold. It's for the cash flow. So we're due to make nearly 50% return on cash left in and 15% return on equity. So that's the amount of equity that's stuck in. So it's a huge cash cow, we're going to call it. And next week, we'll give you much more details on it.
Yeah, nice. If you're tuning in on the podcast already, thank you very much. On Spotify, Apple, Castbox, Amazon Music, we do repurpose these videos from YouTube to the podcast. So if you haven't watched the videos before, in the link description, hopefully there will be a link to our YouTube channel where you can actually see and visualize some of the things that we're talking about. Jack mentioned this lovely doctor's surgery. You can't really see what that is on the podcast, but if you head over to YouTube, you can actually see beautiful building we have just bought today. Cool. Corporate guarantees or debentures? Favorite topic?
I'll try and keep this one fairly brief. The site that you've just seen, we're working with a new lender, and their company-wide rule is they have to have a debenture over the company. Now, this isn't really an issue if you're delivering a project within an SPV. So that's a standalone special purchase vehicle, and it sort of ring fences it from everything else in the group. A debenture is essentially a charge over the company. It's a bit like a first charge, but rather than being on the asset, is on the company, and it sits on top of them having a first charge as well. The first thing I said is I don't want that. That's going to prohibit movement and acquisitions elsewhere in the business, and that's a pain in the arse. So I feel like the downside of a debenture, other than the additional security, is it restricts movement and activity within that business. So for an example, Central Suites buy a property every couple of months. If we had a debenture on our company, it would be very arduous and painful to have to go back to the firm that have the debenture, get consent. It's actually called a letter of non-crystallization. They then have to consent to the new lender. When you're completing on a site and you've got every man and their dog ringing you, the last thing you want to be doing is calling a lender from 12 months ago to get consent for a loan today, and then they put their hand out and want $4,000 to do it. So I absolutely hate debentures, and that's why we pushed back on it on day one. And what we requested instead of a debenture is a corporate guarantee. A corporate guarantee is very different. It's more like a personal guarantee, but the company is guaranteeing the loan. So the debenture is there for security and potential recourse for action, but the corporate guarantee is sat within the company as a legal paperwork, and it can have step-in rights to some degree, but it doesn't sit on Companies House, and it doesn't prohibit movement, and it doesn't say that you can't go and do X, Y, and Z within the same company. It all came down to it, and we actually rejected using the corporate guarantee and just folded and used the debenture route in the end, because the corporate guarantee compromised some agreements we've got below in the group. So 3 businesses down. So in the top company, having a corporate guarantee compromised a legal document that we have below. So we had to give with the debenture painfully. Knowing the bank, they sent us both and we signed both. And then we realized we accidentally signed the corporate guarantee. So we're getting that ripped up. But I just thought it would be useful to share. If you can get away with it, you don't really want to be giving either of these documents. What I would say is a really good place for a corporate guarantee is if you can get a corporate guarantee given that isn't too primitive and too onerous on the business, 100% go for that, because it's much better your company having to try and cough up a guarantee than it is you personally. So that's where I do think it has got a really good place. But where it hasn't got a good place is where it's extremely onerous and it's got takeover rights that impact the group further down. Essentially, we didn't get what we wanted. We've had to put a debenture on the company. Fortunately, it's not a company that we buy loads in, so it's not the end of the world. But if we do buy something else, I've got to go cap in hand and get a letter of non-crystallization from the lender and go through that process. And I mainly know this because we had one in Central Suites and I had to do it 10 times. And then I had to pay something like 60 quid to get it removed. And I was like, why didn't I ask for this sooner? But there you go.
Lesson learned. Cool. Quickly on to point number 7. We are recruiting for an admin assistant and or a BDM, so a business development manager in XP Surveys. We've got a lot of growth plans within this business. We need some additional admin support. If you live in and around Henley-on-Thames, I guess for the admin assistant, we're looking for, potentially a graduate that's very tech savvy that can come in and help us kind of manage the workload, free up some more of our team's time to then go out and do a bit more outreach and build the relationships with the existing architects and developers that we've currently got. So if you know anyone, or it's you that would like to apply for this, we do have a job advert on Indeed and LinkedIn.
Very good. The most exciting topic of today, covenant strength. I'll try and keep this one fairly brief as well. So I've been dealing a lot with covenants this week, and a covenant is essentially something in a space. So what I mean by that is your covenant is your tenant or your person letting or leasing a building that you may own. And that is really important for a number of reasons. And I will go into detail of what they are and what you should look for. But there's a lot of things that get missed off, which is really important. Because I had someone say to me, they're a really strong covenant. Have you looked at their books? And I looked at their books and I said, what's strong about their books? And their analysis of the books were really, really weak. So the most common things you can look at from a lease perspective or a rental perspective is how much rent is being paid, what the duration is of the lease, the breaks, the notice for the breaks. Are they one way? Are they both ways? Rent reviews, is it index linked or is it linked in any other particular way? What are the tenure? So is it repairing, fully internal repairing or externally repairing? And then obviously looking at the business, and it's quite common you go, oh yeah, I know them. They're a blue chip. It's McDonald's, they're never going to go bust. Or alternatively, the mum and pop that might not quite be that. But one really important detail that I think is to look at when you're buying an asset that's got a covenant within the building, we always look at a few things. The value add of the site is probably the most important for us because we don't like dry investments. And the next slide, I've got an offer for you guys about dry investments. And you can ask me all these questions on the covenant strength if you want. So I might be creating a rod for my own back. So we look for value add on the site, then looking into the profit of the site. So is that yield good? Are we getting a good return on cash? The security of that tenant. Obviously, so with covenants, the stronger the business or the outfit that's in there. So let's say you had Apple renting your retail unit in the center of town. That is going to boost the value of your property way higher. So it's going to be the rent times the lower yield, so a lower income yield, which improves the value of your property. So the covenant strength, that is the main reason why it's super important for the security perspective of that. And then the last thing we look at is exit. How long are they going to be there? When's the lease going to end? Can you relet it? Is an important thing. Now, here's just some tips outside of the norm. So the norms are rent, duration, breaks, and reviews. But these are some things that are outside the norm. We've been talking about looking at companies' books. So on Companies House, looking at their accounts. Look at their books. Have a look how stable they are. Have a look at what their P&L is. Have a look at how many assets they have in the business. The case study that I mentioned just earlier where someone said their books look really good is because we were looking at an asset where the company had been set up 2 years ago and it had traded about £400,000 in gross revenue, basically no profit. But they had £3 million in a bank account. So these people selling this opportunity said to me, they're really strong books. And I said, well, they could transfer that out tomorrow. Cash can be moved. You've got to look at the underlying figures within their books, the assets retained in the business, which could also be sold. And if you're caught at the wrong time, that's a difficult position. So don't necessarily look at the cash, look at the turnover and the assets, etc., and the profitability. If they are a weak covenant, can you get any other guarantees from a father company or a mother company or someone else, whether it's personal or whatever it may be? This was a really interesting question also that sort of turned the heads of the people that I was speaking to is how is their income generated, which is a really good one. So not only are you analysing them, but you're analysing the next step of how they, put bums on seat or feed their mouths. And that's really important. So with our social portfolio, it's really important to see how our housing association is funded. If we can't understand that, it might be an unsustainable tenancy. I can explain that. So if our housing association is taking a percentage of local housing allowance and paying, which this isn't the case, but let's assume they're paying a CPI inflationary linked income, their income, it doesn't go up when CPI goes up. So they might be in an unaffordable lease. So investigating their income. And obviously, if it's a trading entity that's like catering or entertainment, that's very difficult because essentially it's a consumer. But if it's, a housing association, or it's, for this particular example, it was a management agency for asylum seekers, so we could actually assess, where do they get their funds from? It was the Home Office. What do they pay? Is this sustainable? So that's a really good thing to look at. And then next down, once you looked at the income, who's running it? Who's the operations? With your mum and pop or your big, blue chip corporate, they would just send someone in, regional manager, that's successful down the road and just sort stuff out if there's a problem. If it's mum and pop, you are liable for, one of them falling ill or not actually being that good at running their numbers or their books or generating business. So it's definitely something to look at. I discussed exit, so demand and replacement. If that tenant leaves, what can you replace them with? With commercial properties, I think the last thing you want to be doing is buying something that's going to be redundant if that individual leaves. So for an example for that is, we bought the police station off the Thames Valley Police. No other police station can move into that space. So you need to find a different exit. There's not another police, independent police company outside of the Thames Valley. So analysing demand and replacement is important. And I always think location is key when you're taking on assets that you are looking at the potential exit or replacement for that. So some top tips about to just think outside the box a bit and just improve your sort of gut feel on a commercial asset.
Very good. If you've
I've just trained everyone how to absolutely scrutinize the hell out of a commercial deal, especially a dry investment. But just putting it out there, we don't tend to buy dry investments, but we have a site which is agreed and under offer. And Ben, I don't even think Ben knows that yet. And essentially, we're looking for just someone that wants a dry investment, 20-year full repairing lease, blue chip covenant, really good asset to be buying, if I must say so myself, in terms of the covenant strength. And I've just armed you with all the right questions to ask me if you are interested. But we're not interested in, dry investment. It increases the amount of debt we're borrowing and acquisition costs for the site. So we're open to basically simultaneously selling the ground floor while we'll take the uppers. So if anyone is interested in buying a dry investment yield on a 20-year full repairing lease at 8.3%, send me a message and I can run you through the deal and see if it's for you.
Very good. And just a quick note, Thursday, the 8th of February, we have a networking event for specifically kind of architects and property developers. So if you are an architect or property developer listening to this, or anyone within the construction industry, it's a meeting in the Bull on Bell Street in Henley-on-Thames. Starts at 4:00. We've got David Kemp, who is an incredible planning consultant who's working with us on some of our schemes, does a lot on the sort of property networking circuit in terms of speaking and giving everyone the insights into what the latest PD opportunities are and how you can beat the planning system, etc. And then Claire Truman, who we've worked on a number of heritage assets with, conservation architect. She's going to be talking about how to work with listed buildings. We are almost full in the room. We've got a cap, only got about 5 spaces left. So if you do want to come to this, it is free. There'll be plenty of networking both before and afterwards. Do get in touch and we hope to see you there.
I would like to just say on that, Ben, if there's anyone that is part of the Titans group, so the Titans event, you could probably make both if you wanted to. I've had a couple of people message me. So we start at 4 and we'll be finished with the talks by 6, but then it's rolling into networking. So if you really wanted to jam it in and you're a networking junkie, then we think you can make both. We didn't mean to clash. This is obviously a slightly different event to the amazing Titans event, but just thought I'd put that in there.
Yeah, nice. Do we have time for this?
Yeah, let's go.
So Daniel Young, I can hear us screaming, Lucas behind me. Daniel Young has commented via YouTube, "Hi Ben, what terms would you usually put into an option agreement?" Take it away, Jack.
Yeah, so I think we actually discussed this a few episodes ago, and I'll dig it out and put it in the show notes so that you guys can pick up on that one. I mean, an option agreement, for anyone out there that isn't aware, is exactly what it is. It's essentially a contract where you can buy something if you would like it, and you have exclusivity on that property. And it normally costs, you have to transact with some value. So you normally buy the option agreement for £1 or potentially more. You can do it for £1, but sometimes you need a little bit more, on top of that to line the seller's hands. So you're essentially, the reason that you would want an option agreement is if you think something like a plot of land or a land assembly, they're super good for because it keeps the cost down. You get that agreement so that you can take the risk and go to planning permission to see if you can get consent and then see if you can buy it. So what terms would you want to put in that? First off, keep it as low costly as possible. So £1 options is great, or potentially a low cost of exchange or cost for the option. The reason I've put exchange in there is because we actually don't mind doing a conditional contract, which means the difference between an option is the sort of emphasis is around the word option. You can or can't buy it. A conditional contract is actually where you go in, exchange on the property. And the reason that we quite like doing that is because you have to go then through the conveyancing, do the work on the title, and just do a little bit of legal work to make sure there's no covenant restrictions, problems that you might find when getting the planning. Because the last thing you want to do is spend 20 grand on planning and then actually there's an issue with the title that you got to relieve a covenant and it was all a waste of time in the first place. So either a conditional contract or an option is fine. If it is a conditional contract, make sure it's not the standard 10% exchange funds. We've exchanged for as little as 0.0001%, and you can agree it, just ask the question. One of the other most important things is make sure it's assignable. You kind of don't want to be the person that has to buy it, but could buy it, and someone else could buy it. So make sure your contract is assignable. So that just allows you to sell it on if you would like to, sell it on even to one of your own SPVs, sell it on to a joint venture SPV, or sell it on to the Joe Blogs that wants to pay you loads of money because you've got loads of uplift and planning on the site. So make sure it's assignable.
It's probably worth saying that that's only really relevant to a contract if you've got an exchange with delayed completion. An option agreement is exactly what it says. It is an option to buy subject to certain terms. You're not obliged to if you've signed an option agreement.
But they still need assignability on an option. You know, if you want to benefit from getting the planning, it still needs to be in there.
Very true.
How long do you need? I've put as a bit of tongue-in-cheek, double it. This is actually what I believe probably one of the hardest parts of negotiating options is because the person that you're speaking to is probably not as well educated on planning and how long it takes. Second to that, you're not in control of how long the planning takes. So I would definitely recommend working out how long you need and doubling it. In a conditional contract, what we do, and this is a really, really top tip if anyone's buying anything subject to planning, is we put time frames for us to submit something. So for an example, we have to submit planning within 6 months, and then we have to make amendments and resubmit planning if failure within 3 months of receipt of decision. And what we're doing then is keeping the return of the planning timeframe completely open. For options, it's pretty common that you would be looking at a 24-month or a 36-month option with the option to extend if you can get it. What you'll find is someone go, I don't want to tie myself in for a contract that long. So what I would then suggest is agreeing a shorter option, enough time for you to submit planning with the option to extend if you get a failure of planning or you need to extend because the planning's taken longer than it is. So it might be easier to go that way, but start a little bit longer. And then pricing of the option. There's tons of ways that you can price an option, that you can go on basically fixed price. And then what I would suggest doing is working out the gross development values, actually stacking all of them and analysing them. And you ideally want to pay the lower value of the most likely scheme. So let's say 2 units and most likely 10 units is pushing it, and you end up with 7. You kind of want to pay the minimal price possible so that you have a planning buffer and uplift in there, and you're making value in planning, which is, in my opinion, the most important part of options. The reason people go into options is to make planning uplift. If you just want build uplift, go and buy something with planning. So then moving on to percentage of GDV, what you can equally do to de-risk it for yourself is pay someone a land value on the gross development value. So if you end up getting 2 units or you end up getting 10 units, just paying them, for example, 12% on gross development value of either scheme. It's open-ended. The council will essentially probably lean you towards more than one of the routes, and you end up paying a percentage on that unit. What you may have to do is stipulate exactly how you get to that GDV, because you're going to have to buy the site before you even develop the units. So it will probably have to be a third-party RICS chartered surveyor to depict that GDV. Equally to the pound per square foot. So pound per square foot is fairly straightforward. We know our pound per square foot. The site that we completed on today, we're buying it for £131 per square foot in an area that's £425 per square foot. So I kind of know where we can buy a site at. So if we get consent, for example, for 2 units, and they're both 1,000 square foot houses, you can agree a certain pound per square foot that you'll pay for those 2 units. If you end up getting 10, it sort of amplifies, and that's the end result. So it's a sort of subjective to the planning, because you don't know, it's all unknown. And to some degree, when someone's selling their garden, 40k might not sound that exciting, but if you get the 10 units, it might be somewhere like 200k. So if you angle it that way and price that way, you're protecting yourself, but also making it a bit more exciting as a value for the vendor.
Good, perfect, good stuff. Well, Daniel, hopefully you've got some value from that. Let us know below, do the like thing, reply, and if you've got any further questions, then comment down below as well. But that's all we've got time for this week. We've gone on the longest we ever have done, but I think so. But I did say it was full of jam-packed stuff, which I believe it has been. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. Do like, comment, and just share with one person if you can. That would help us massively. And until next week, see you then.
Ta-da.
These live Q&A episodes are all about helping you grow your business and build a property portfolio that provides financial wealth. If you have specific topics that you'd like us to discuss, make sure to comment on the platform you're listening on or email info@xpproperty.co.uk so that we can discuss your topic in future episodes. And if you found these conversations valuable for growing your business, make sure to click that follow button, and we'd really love for you to tell just one person about us. Thank you.